Hello there. Welcome to my class. My name is Marcio de Paula, and I will be your instructor for today's lesson. Today we will be talking about QuickBooks Desktop 2020 Chapter 9. Using QuickBooks for payroll. Payroll is a sensitive subject because it affects people's livelihoods. As an employer, you should be well informed of all payroll options and well equipped to manage payroll for your business efficiently. In this chapter, you will first set up QuickBooks to run payroll and manage the employees list. Then you will examine how QuickBooks deals with payroll by creating paychecks, tracking payroll liabilities, and processing payroll forms by using a sample company file that includes a free payroll subscription. Finally, you will account for payroll completed by an outside payroll service. By the end of this chapter, you will be able to set up QuickBooks to run payroll, manage the employees list, create paychecks, track and pay payroll liabilities, fix payroll errors, process payroll forms and reports, input information from an outside payroll service into QuickBooks. Now, let's get started. We're taking a break from Parrots Paradise Resort in sunny Key West and traveling west to California, where we'll work with Rock Castle Construction as we learn about payroll. The Rock Castle QuickBooks file is a sample company file, which means it's set to open on a specific date and has a sample payroll subscription. This book teaches how to use QuickBooks to run payroll for a company using fictitious information from an outside payroll service. But first, contact your local tax agency to determine which tax laws apply to you and to whom you should submit taxes. Don't use the specific percentages, vendors, or amounts shown, even if from your local jurisdiction, because tax laws change all the time. It is your responsibility to stay informed on your own or through a paid service, such as those offered by Intuit. Setting up QuickBooks to run payroll. We begin our payroll journey by looking at the payroll options in QuickBooks and learning which payroll items to include and how to manage payroll preferences. Payroll record keeping in QuickBooks. QuickBooks keeps a separate set of payroll records to produce the required federal, state, and local payroll forms and reports. These records track payroll liabilities, paychecks, and the items listed on them, and taxes. Due to this method of payroll record keeping, only those transactions entered via QuickBooks payroll features will affect payroll reporting. Payroll options. QuickBooks Payroll offers multiple options: manual, basic, enhanced, and full service. There are also separate services for accountants, online edition users, and those who need to process household and nanny payroll. And there are mobile payroll apps, so you can keep up with your payroll tasks on the go. Each option has its pros and cons, and all but the manual option are associated with a fee. Intuit does not recommend the manual option, as it requires you to stay abreast of all tax law changes, and there's a higher likelihood of error and resulting penalties when you enter everything yourself. To learn more about the payroll options available through QuickBooks, visit the Intuit website at quickbooks.intuit.com. QuickBooks can change its payroll options at any time, so check out the website to ensure you're dealing with the most current information. QuickBooks is not ideal for all companies' payroll needs. If multiple states require you to run payroll for an individual employee, or you withhold a certain percentage of wages on paychecks, using QuickBooks for payroll may not be the best solution for you. Common mistakes when using QuickBooks for payroll. There are two common mistakes people make when using QuickBooks for payroll. Making a payroll liabilities adjustment with a journal entry. Paying the liabilities with a regular check rather than a liability check similar to what you used when paying sales tax. The chart of accounts is affected in both cases, but the separate payroll records that QuickBooks keeps are not. If you've used a regular check for payroll liabilities, you'll need to adjust the liability adjustment window, from where you can choose for QuickBooks not to affect the chart of accounts. Another common error is for people to set up their payroll items incorrectly. If you use subaccounts and remap your payroll accounts manually, take care to map the payroll items correctly. Historical amounts. If you're beginning to use the QuickBooks Payroll feature for existing employees who have received at least one paycheck from you, and it's not the first day of January, you must enter the payroll history amounts. This ensures that QuickBooks properly calculates taxes with thresholds. It also ensures you'll be able to produce accurate W-2s at the end of the year. QuickBooks can assist you in entering the required payroll history. Before you begin setting up historical amounts, make sure you have prior period paychecks, prior liability payments. Step-by-step help for this task is accessible through the QuickBooks Payroll Setup interview. After you've entered the information, you'll have the opportunity to reconcile and verify your data to ensure it's correct. Remember that the activities of the business can be divided into time periods. Payroll items. Before you can run payroll for a company, you must set up the taxes and deductions to collect and indicate to whom they will be paid. You can use the payroll item list or the QuickBooks Payroll Setup interview to set up and edit payroll items. In addition, you can view the payroll item listing report to verify that the taxes and deductions are being routed to the right expense and liability accounts, as well as the actual payroll item list to make sure the vendors to whom you pay them are correct. You must have your Federal Employer Identification Number, FIN or EIN for Employer Identification Number, listed in your company file for payroll to be processed correctly. If you didn't enter this correctly when you created your company file, you could make the change at any time. The Payroll Setup Interview. The Payroll Setup Interview walks you through the steps of setting up payroll in QuickBooks to make sure you set up taxes, compensation, and benefits correctly. This feature also helps you set up your employees and enter historical amounts, so you can begin doing your company's payroll in QuickBooks. Payroll Item List. Anything you wish to include on a paycheck such as wages, taxes, employee loans, and 401k withholdings must first be set up as a payroll item. Most payroll mistakes are made because payroll items were not set up properly. The payroll item list displays all payroll items, from compensation to taxes and other deductions. Remember, payroll item limits change often. Figures are, for example, only. Do not use them for your own company. If you need to add payroll items later, you can always return to the QuickBooks Payroll Setup interview or access the payroll item list from the menu bar. Making payroll data more meaningful. When you turn on the payroll preference in QuickBooks, the payroll expense and liability accounts are created for you. QuickBooks then routes payroll items set up through the QuickBooks Payroll Setup to these accounts. To provide more meaningful information in your reports and make troubleshooting more user-friendly, you may want to set up sub-accounts for the payroll accounts QuickBooks creates for you. When you create sub-accounts, you must remap each payroll item to the correct one through the payroll item list. Verifying correct payroll item setup. To verify the payroll items are set up correctly and mapped to the correct accounts, run the payroll item listing report. If you see either payroll liability other or payroll expense other on a balance sheet or P&L, you know that a payroll item is mapped to a parent account rather than a sub-account. The payroll item listing report shows what happens behind the scenes with expense and liability accounts when using a payroll item. Sick and vacation time. QuickBooks allows you to track employee sick and vacation time easily. Sick and vacation time defaults apply to all new employees created. To update this information for existing employees, you will need to open each employee record and make the changes. You have 3 options for the accrual period: the beginning of the year, every paycheck, and every hour on a paycheck. Your local jurisdiction may have regulations governing sick time, so make sure you understand them before setting it up for your company. You can set default sick and vacation options that will apply to all new employees and edit options for each employee. Note the 3 accrual period options for both vacation and sick time. Workers' compensation insurance. QuickBooks can process workers' compensation insurance in much the same way it processes payroll taxes. To track this payroll expense, your first step is to turn on the preference. Working with employees in QuickBooks. The QuickBooks definition of an employee is someone to whom you issue a W-2 at the end of the year. Subcontractors are not entered into the employees list, but are entered as vendors. You will use the Employee Center to track employees. You will edit, delete, and create new employees the same way you did for customers and vendors. New employees can also be set up as part of the QuickBooks Payroll Setup interview. The employee information required for payroll setup includes name, address, social security number, birth date, and federal and state exemption information. Also needed are the salaries, hourly wages, bonuses, and additional deductions to be withheld, such as investment plan contributions or child support payments for your employees. To run payroll, you must enter tax information for each employee. If you don't have your employees' W-4 forms handy, you can add the information later if it's entered before you first run payroll, not optional. It's important to have all your employees' W-4 and I-9 forms neatly organized with all personnel records, or that your outside payroll service has them all completed. Workers' compensation companies thoroughly review company payroll records. Even though you don't treat independent contractors as employees in QuickBooks, keep an I-9 form on file for each subcontractor. Before setting up your employees, set the employee defaults. When doing so, choose the options that apply to the majority of employees you will create, such as pay schedule, health insurance, and 401k. These preferences are applied to each new employee you create, and you can change them as needed. Creating paychecks. After you've chosen your payroll method, made sure your payroll items are set up properly, and set up your employees and payroll tax information, you can begin creating paychecks for your employees. When you first choose to pay employees, you will see an Enter Hours window displayed. Then, after you've entered the paycheck information for each employee, you will see all the data in the Review and Create Paychecks window. After entering the hours worked in the Enter Payroll Information window, the Review and Create Paycheck window allows you to view a summary of all paychecks you are about to create. Payroll schedules. When you use QuickBooks for payroll, you have the option to set up payroll schedules so payroll runs more efficiently. Payroll schedules allow you to set how often you pay employees, the date on which the paychecks are due, and the date on which you will run payroll, all the while considering holidays and weekends to ensure you pay employees on time. Another benefit of using scheduled payroll is that you can choose to pay employees by group or by batch. Payroll schedules are created from the Payroll Center or via the payroll schedule list. Using scheduled payroll does not limit you from creating a paycheck for an employee off schedule. If an employee has time spent on a job, those billable payroll expenses can be passed on to customers. Therefore, when you create a paycheck for an employee who has billable hours, choose the correct customer or job to pass on the expense. In this behind the scenes, you view the parent accounts for the payroll liabilities and expenses, not the sub-accounts. Tracking and paying payroll liabilities. When you run payroll, you must collect taxes and other deductions and hold them in a current liability account until you're required to pay them. QuickBooks has preset reports for the employee and payroll aspects of your business. One such report, Payroll Liability Balances, shows the amount you owe to various vendors that are being held in these liability accounts. You may have only one account, payroll liabilities, if you don't use sub-accounts. The Pay Payroll Liabilities window. Just as you used the Pay Sales Tax window to pay your sales tax liabilities, you will use a special Pay Liabilities window to pay your payroll taxes and deductions. Never use write checks for your payroll taxes if you're using QuickBooks Payroll because QuickBooks will not properly debit the liability accounts. After choosing which liabilities to pay, the liability payment checking window launches, which will debit the payroll liability account in which the funds are held. If your bank sends your federal payroll taxes electronically, clear the Print Later checkbox and enter EFTPS, Electronic Federal Tax Payment Service, in the check number field. Correcting payroll errors. When correcting payroll errors, ensure you do so properly. Remember that QuickBooks keeps a separate set of books for payroll, so you must make changes via the payroll features. The Edit/Void Paychecks window allows you to choose which paycheck to edit/void and provides guidance. It is only on rare occasions that you should void a paycheck. Two such times are when you accidentally created a paycheck or correct a paycheck from a prior year. If you need to change the date of a paycheck from one year to another, you must void the existing paycheck and issue a new one. Voiding a paycheck is done in basically the same way as voiding any transaction in QuickBooks. Just remember that when you recreate the paycheck, you must do so through the proper method. That is, you cannot just create a new check-in in the Write Checks window. If you need to make changes to a paycheck and want to make sure you don't change the amount, which is dealt with differently, use the Lock Net Pay feature. It prevents you from changing the amount of the paycheck or the total wages, but you can make changes to things that don't affect the check amount, such as the class to which it is assigned, vacation or sick time accrual, or direct deposit sign-up. There may be times you need to issue a paycheck to an employee when it's not at the end of a pay period. For instance, you may have underpaid an employee and don't want that employee to wait until the next payday to receive the compensation, or you may need to issue a final paycheck. These situations are easily dealt with in QuickBooks from the Payroll Center window by choosing either to conduct an unscheduled payroll or to create a termination check. Depending on the type of payroll service you subscribe to, there may be limitations on how you will be able to correct specific payroll errors. Paying a payroll liability with a regular check rather than a liability check will create issues for you behind the scenes. To set things right, you need to void the regular check and then process the payment through the Pay Payroll Liabilities feature. Payroll forms and reports. The forms you can produce through QuickBooks depend on the payroll option selected. Let's look at a few basic payroll forms used in the United States and how QuickBooks supports each of them. W-2S and W-3S. W-2S are provided to each employee. They summarize earnings and deductions for the year. A W-3 form is what you prepare and submit to the government. It summarizes the W-2 information you provided to employees. If you subscribe to one of the enhanced payroll services, you can print W-2S and W-3S on blank paper right from QuickBooks. On the other hand, if you subscribe to the full service, QuickBooks provides the completed forms for you. Form 940 and 941. Form 941 is the employer's quarterly federal tax return. QuickBooks will fill in the appropriate amounts. You can edit the amounts if the IRS rules instruct you to do so. Form 940 is the employer's annual federal unemployment (FUTA) tax return. QuickBooks stores forms for only 1 year at a time. You will need to subscribe to a payroll service to download the correct year's form. Again, QuickBooks will fill in the appropriate amounts, which you can edit if necessary. 1099 MISC and 1096. When you have vendors to whom you subcontract work, you will report their earnings and provide them Form 1099 MISC. The 1096 form is something you prepare for the federal government. It summarizes the 1099 information you provided to subcontractors. Before running 1099 MISC forms, you must turn on the preference and properly set up your 1099 vendors. A wizard will walk you through 1099 and 1096 form preparation and filing. You can print 1099 MISC forms for your subcontractors right from QuickBooks. If you subscribe to the full service, Intuit will prepare the 1099 MISC forms for you. Other payroll reports. In addition to the payroll reports you've already seen, QuickBooks provides a variety of additional reports, including some that can be run in Excel. All of these reports can be found in the Employees and Payroll category in the Report Center. You can track changes to employee pay rates with the Employee Pay Adjustments History Report. Many companies use an outside payroll service. If this is your case, you still must enter the information into QuickBooks to create meaningful financial statements. However, the level of information you track in QuickBooks does not have to be as detailed when you use an outside service because much of the information is tracked for you. You need not worry about setting up QuickBooks for payroll or using the payroll features of the software because you are not tracking specific withholdings and deductions. Instead, your intent when working with an outside service is to track expenses, cash flow, and balances being held in liability accounts, so your balance sheet, profit and loss, and cash flow reports are accurate. Don't turn on the QuickBooks Payroll features if you track payroll from an outside source. Enter your employees into the Employees list in QuickBooks. You will not need to enter information on the Payroll Info tab though, as the service will track that. To account for the company's payroll expenses, you set up an expense account, such as payroll expenses, and appropriate subaccounts for each type of payroll expense. Examples of subaccounts are gross wages, company-paid benefits, and company-paid taxes. You will still be holding deductions and withdrawals from employees that have to be paid to the appropriate agency in the future. To do so requires you set up an other current liability account, such as payroll liabilities, to track this information. When you receive a report from the payroll service that shows the payroll activity for your company, you will need to enter it into QuickBooks. You will see payments going to employees and out to the agencies for which you are currently holding funds in the payroll liabilities account. Employee paychecks are entered in the Write Checks window. You enter gross wages on the first line of the Expenses tab. All deductions are entered on the second line as a negative amount and will flow into the payroll liabilities account. When using an outside payroll service, you also use the Write Checks window to enter payments when you pay the payroll liabilities. On the Expense tab, you enter the employee-paid taxes and deductions being held in payroll liabilities. Company-paid taxes and benefits are entered on separate lines using the appropriate payroll expenses subaccounts. What we are talking about here applies only when a company is using an outside payroll service. For example, never use the Write Checks window for payroll transactions if you complete payroll using QuickBooks Payroll feature. The payroll reports provided in QuickBooks are designed to be used with the QuickBooks Payroll features. To display data regarding outside payroll service transactions, you will need to use the regular reports and modify them to display this information. That's all for today. Your next step is to review this chapter and get the exercises started. Thank you for participating in today's lesson. I will see you in our next session. And remember, if you don't know, askmarcio.com.